All right, take whatever. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 fantasy football preview for the Cincinnati Bengals. Hopefully I get this done this time. So last year, this was an offense we thought was going to be good, and they turned out not to be good. That was because of the Joe Burrow injury. He looks like he's on track to return this year. I just heard the other day who he's throwing it in practice. This is one of those things when we talk about fantasy football, I don't know, guidelines, is we generally want pieces of good offenses, and we generally want them at the cheapest possible prices. The other thing to look at with the Bengals this year is how we want to be using camp news, things that we think we know, things that we want to find out, and then things that we hear that are coming out that we didn't really know what was going on, and we're just like, that was not something I was expecting. The other thing to be looking at with from a fantasy perspective is how to deal with camp injuries. And general rule of thumb on this one, and pun intended, when it comes to Joe Burrow, is injuries in camp, we want to be packing our stuff up and getting away from the ADPs as fast as possible. And when it comes to quarterbacks, we want to be getting away from all the pieces of offenses when we hear about camp injuries. Camp injuries tend to linger into the season. And when I talked about Aaron Rodgers and the Jets the other day, it wasn't that we could predict that Aaron Rodgers was going to hurt his Achilles. What we could predict was that the offense was going to struggle. And in the case of Joe Burrow and that calf injury that he had in camp, we could predict the beginning of the season that the offense was going to struggle, even though we couldn't predict that he was going to hurt the thumb later on. That's just general rule of thumb when it comes to how to deal with the fantasy guidelines of camp. Okay, moving on to news and notes so I can get this done today and move on to other stuff. Tyler Boyd, and we're going to talk about Tyler Boyd a little bit later. He signs a 1-year deal with the Tennessee Titans for $4.5 million. Rashad Penny, rumors are he's going to sign with the Carolina Panthers. Now, this is going to get really interesting. Again, things that we think we know, things that we want to find out. Maybe there's a chance that Jonathan Brooks, the second-round draft pick, starts the season on the PUP. We also know, or we also think we know that Miles Sanders disappointed on that $6 million a year contract that he signed last year. He's basically going to get paid to be on that roster or not. And then the other thing is Chuba Hubbard, who looked really good at the end of the season as being the bell cow for that offense. Really bad season for the Panthers. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. So Rashad Penny is not going to play special teams. So when they bring a guy like this in, knowing that there's at least two backs on the roster that may not be on the roster at the beginning of the season, and they have a rookie running back coming off of a torn ACL at the end of last year, there are some tea leaves that say Rashad Penny may be the starting running back at the beginning of the season for the Panthers. That's what we're looking at this point, the possibility of that occurring. Miles Sanders getting cut or traded, and Chuba Hubbard being traded at this point. Jonathan Brooks starting the season on the PUP. Those are the things I'd be looking for based off of this potential signing. Moving on to Rashid Rice. Looks like he's going to be in trouble with the law again. This is not a Law and Order channel. This is a fantasy football channel, so I don't care. I've already moved him down to around wide receiver 35. This actually has nothing to do with all his legal problems. The only thing that I would talk about with his legal problems would be that, remember, Alvin Kamara punted a guy in the head last year. They have that on tape. It took about a year for that legal situation to get worked out. I'm not going to say certain people were or were not paid off, but at the end of the day, he had a rather light plea deal. The league suspended him for 3 games, and that took a while to figure out. So unless Rashid Rice wants to plead out very early on and take the suspension before the 2024 season, once the season starts, I imagine the resolution to all this won't happen until 2025. That's just my general thoughts. And I think he's hurt more by the first-round draft pick of Xavier Worthy than anything else going on. Theoretical upside of him being wide receiver 1 is hurt because of that, and that's why I moved him down. All right. Allen Robinson signs with the Giants. And again, this is one of those things where you might go like, I don't care, potentially to play like an isolated X or to play a big slot role. Making me think that like Darren Waller may be closer to retiring. That would move up Daniel Bellinger. A signing like Allen Robinson, what this makes me think is he will do some of the dirty work, the veteran stuff at this point to open up a Malik Neighbors. We're going to talk about a little bit about Malik Neighbors today with the Bengals stuff. So this is just something that goes, hey, I like that. I like the role that he would play in the offense to get other guys to do the things that I'm going to pay for them to do in fantasy football land. And then finally, this is another role player and guy. We're going to talk a little bit more about Trenton Irwin with the Bengals. So the Rams trade Ben Skoranek to the Titans, to the Texans. And if you're wondering why this is a big deal, Ben Skoranek is a role player. He is a wide receiver that would line up and play fullback for the Rams. So this is one of those guys you bring in to play special teams and to do the things that you ask him to do so you can win football games. If you weren't believing it before, the Texans are trying to win a Super Bowl this year, and a move like this tells me this is a guy that you bring in to fill out your roster on game day. All right, moving on. I talked about this the other day. Scoring is going to be down in the NFL. Trying to parse out some of these legendary type seasons for some of these players is going to be a harder road. Again, 2023, it's down to 21 points a game from a high of 24.8 in 2020. And then overall rushing touchdowns are down from 2020 right there, second overall. And then they are down. Passing touchdowns are also down from 2020. So again, harder roads to get the scoring and the yards for certain guys to have those seasons that we're looking for when it comes to winning. Okay, last year with the Bengals, it is not going to be a apples to apples comparison because of the Joe Burrow injury. They were basically bottom third last year. And again, with Joe Burrow coming in, we're expecting them to be top 5. That's where we were expecting them to be last year. That's where we're drafting them at. And, so again, trying to predict forward what prices we should be spending on guys. We are speculating on what we think their ranges of outcomes are. We weren't expecting the Bengals to be bottom third last year. That's where they were. I wouldn't be baking that into their ADP, but again, just remember when you're starting to pull the trigger on some of these guys that there are some things that could go on that are outside of our known expectations. What will occur? So Bengals draft class was first round, Amarius Mims, offensive tackle out of Georgia. Third rounder was Jermaine Burton, wide receiver out of Alabama. Guys like Mims, I really like because it's going to keep the toys doing what we're paying them to do from ADP perspective. A guy like Burton, this is all upside. This is a guy that has character concerns. That's why he fell in the draft. Real life football, he would project out to be like a high end wide receiver 2 down the line. Probably not going to have a lot of value in redraft outside of like deeper type, like wide receiver heavy like leagues. But I do like the player overall. Eric All, the more that I do a little research on him, I do like this pick. I don't know outside of certain camp moves if he's going to be relevant at all in redraft. In Dynasty, this is a guy that like in a year or two projects out to be the tight end attached to Joe Burrow. And again, tight ends can't lose me a league. They can only win me a league. That's just something to think about. And then Tanner McLaughlin, he's a tight end I did like. I didn't think he's going to go this far, fall this far in the draft. 6th round draft pick makes me think he's not going to make the roster. Something to be interested in when we talk about this tight end room. And then if you're wondering about Matt Lee, center out of Miami, I don't know anything about him, so I don't have anything to say. All right, moving on. Joe Burrow, I have him here. Fantasy Pros, they have him at quarterback 7. I have him at quarterback 5. 58 overall on Fantasy Pros. His over underline these 2 years that we can look at with 2021, 2022, where he did about 4,500 yards passing and 35 touchdowns. That's what I would put his over underline at. And then from a rushing perspective, you're looking at about probably 200 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. Again, as guys get older, they tend to be a little less nimbly bimbly. But Joe Burrow has back to college had he will call his number in the red zone. That's the biggest thing that we care about more so than the higher rushing totals. We want the rushing touchdowns anyway. So that's what I would generally put him at overall. My big issue with Joe Burrow when we look at his ADP on Fantasy Pros, is that you're paying for the safety of having a guy that's probably capped out in that sub-elite type of range. I don't know with the current meta for real life football if there's a road for him to have this legendary or elite type season. I'm not going to be shocked that he could throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that's my expectation when I draft him, and I have this pulled up. When we talk about the quarterback rankings, this is ESPN. There are guys like Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels that I know have higher ranges of outcomes than Joe Burrow does because of the rushing upside that they have. So if those guys all hit, I don't have a sub-elite quarterback. I have just a top 10 guy. Not going to lose me a league, not going to win me a league at that point. And that's what I'm a little bit more concerned with when I look at like Joe Burrow at this like 58 overall ADP, is that I'm just punting the pick. And again, sometimes that's a good idea to do. Yeah, I could definitely see that he's going to be in that like 20-point range. And I bring this up again, your scoring settings may be different than mine, but I could definitely see him being in this 20-point a game range, which again, if all those rushing guys don't hit, then I probably do have a league winner. If all those rushing guys do hit, then I just have a quarterback, and I'm in that conundrum of being in maybe I should have streamed or punt the position. That's how I would view my Joe Burrow pick this year. So if you just want to go, hey, I'm getting a guy that's going to run a very good offense, and I'm going to get those passing touchdowns and a little bit of rushing upside, and it's safe, yeah, pull the trigger on that pick. There are other guys in this range of Joe Burrow that I would be more interested if they fall to me. You see Anthony Richardson at pick 52. If he falls, Mark Andrew at pick 54 on Fantasy Pros has the ability to have tight end range of outcomes. Scary Terry, pick 63, is going to have wide receiver 10 range of outcomes. And then Kyler Murray there is going to have quarterback 1 range of outcomes going into him. The other thing is this would be the range where Zamir White, if he is going about 69 overall, this would be the range that I would want to jump up around and grab my Zamir White shares. I think he's got top 10 running back range of outcomes built into him. The other thing when it comes to the quarterback position for the Bengals is Jake Browning, who was the guy who jumped in last year and from a fantasy perspective did have a lot of value. He did re-sign with the Bengals. So again, having the peace of mind knowing that the guy could continue to keep your toys on track if Joe Burrow goes down again. I just like a little bit of that peace of mind with that. Not that he's going to be fantasy relevant without another injury. Let's see. Moving on to Joe Mixon. He gets traded for basically a bag of trips from the Bengals to the Texans. That means we're going to have a vacated backfield going on. Overall, Zach Moss comes in. I have Zach Moss's contract pulled up right here. So basically, it's a 2-year, $4 million contract. On overthecap.com, it says that he's going to basically get $4 million this year. If they get out from under it next year, it's going to be a $1.5 million cap hit. That's something for them to really get out from underneath it. They're not paying him starting running back money. They're not leaving a lot on the table if they cut him like Miles Sanders. So on the overall salaries for running backs, Zach Moss is right here at $4 million. And you see Samaje Perine, $3.75 million, top end running back 2 money for the Broncos. So that's what I'm looking at. You see Antonio Gibson that signed with the Patriots this year, $3.75 million. Jamal Williams that went to the Saints. This is the type of money that is high-end RB2. Maybe you can be a starter money if we have to. You see old man Raheem Mostert and Austin Eckler right around there in the same range. They are not committed with this money to Zach Moss. Now, Zach Moss, if I can bring him up, Zach Moss last year when with the Colts with Jonathan Taylor holding out and the Jonathan Taylor injury did look really good. You see almost 800 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns to go along with another 27 receptions, 192 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, he probably has mid to high end RB2 ranges of outcomes with him. The other running back that we're going to talk about is Chase Brown. He is the 5th round pick last year by the Bengals. I really liked him coming out of college. He's going to have the better athletic measurables, 4.43 guy against Zach Moss's 4.65 guy. So if I'm putting my money on anybody, it's going to be Chase Brown over Zach Moss as I clear out of that. But the main thing to be looking at with these two guys, when I pull up Fantasy Pros, is it's going to cost me 94 overall to bring in Zach Moss with a theoretical range of outcomes as like RB2 if he gets the backfield. It's going to cost me 109 to go pull Chase Brown in this backfield with a theoretical upside of RB1 because, again, he has the athletic profile. That's all I really care about. Last year, when we look at Kyron Williams, everybody that was paying attention to that backfield, and I wasn't one of them, like we're talking about like beat writers, Rams homers, those type of things, knew that this was not going to be Cam Akers backfield. This was going to be Kyron Williams backfield. So in this case, I am right now thinking this is going to be a 50-50 split between the two of them. I have the Bengals running backs ranked out as running back 19. So right now I would be okay jumping all the way up to about pick 61, I think it is, and pulling the trigger on either Zach Moss or Chase Brown, expecting that it's going to be some type of 50-50 timeshare in a good offense. The range of outcomes on these guys, because of how high they are, I would be really interested in either Zach Moss as a potential RB2 or Chase Brown as having that league-winning type upside if he gets this backfield. And that's why, as I bring this back to Joe Mixon, that's why I have Joe Mixon pulled up what he did when he had this backfield. And when we look at his snap share last year, ranging between 55 in week 18 and 79. Yeah, that's a high in week 4. That's what I would be expecting the possibility of getting out of Chase Brown. So from a scoring perspective, if I bring this up right here, from a running backs, you're looking at something, again, your settings and my settings may be different, but Joe Mixon doing about 15.7 points a game, mid to high end RB2, something along those lines. And I'm spending either pick 94 if you like Zach Moss. I like my Chase Brown shares at pick 109. I would not probably be willing to go up and overspend on Zach Moss. I would be willing to go up and overspend about 10 picks on Chase Brown because of the athletic profile, potentially getting that run. They didn't pay Zach Moss to come in and be the RB1. They already had Chase Brown there. They paid Zach Moss to come in and be Samaje Perine from a draft capital standpoint. That's what I'd be looking at. The insurance policy to Chase Brown not being able to hold the backfield. So I would be putting Chase Brown. He's one of the guys I actually, when I was breaking this down, I put Chase Brown onto my priority draft list because of this, especially at that draft price at 109 overall on Fantasy Pros. Again, I could probably go up there, spend about pick 100. If he burns me and I get a split backfield, I could either trade the guy to the Zach Moss owner, or I can, just throw him away because it's going to cost me relatively nothing at that point, about a 10th round pick. All right, moving on to the wide receiver room for the Bengals. So the 1 year that we can look at with these guys is going to be about 2021, where roughly Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd were all healthy. Tyler Boyd last year, in that down year because of the injuries to Joe Burrow, he was at 67 receptions, 667 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, I would put the over-under line for Mike Gesicki and Jermaine Burton around that area. So you're looking at wide receiver 51 last year as a low-end range of outcomes. So when I look at Jermaine Burton, he's going 193 overall, all the way down here. Wide receiver, let me see. He's going wide receiver 78. And I think that's outside his range of outcomes. I have him at wide receiver 61. I'm kind of waiting to see what goes on with the tight end position, if Gesicki makes the roster or not. Because with your Tyler Boyd shares, and I can bring this back up, with Tyler Boyd, you're also looking at the range of outcomes to get roughly 2021 season, 67 receptions, 800 yards, and 5 touchdowns to support like a 4,500 yard Joe Burrow with 35 touchdowns. So I could definitely see Jermaine Burton getting in this range. So I'll pick 193, wide receiver 78. I definitely think that would be, in wide receiver deeper leagues, I definitely think that would be a good pick. In regular type normal redraft, wide receiver 61 is going to be worth the possibility of having wide receiver 3 range of outcomes. So again, I don't think he's draftable in those leagues unless we get like some news about T. Higgins or something like that. But that's what would be looking at with these guys, Gesicki and Burton. To move on, let's see, go back to this one. To move on, so Jamar Chase, he is listed on Fantasy Pros as wide receiver 4. I have him as wide receiver 3. They have him 4 overall. I think that's relatively where he should go. The reason why I'm not interested in Jamar Chase is because when we look at that 2021 season, which is going to be what I would be expecting his over-under line to be, about 45 or 1,400 yards and 13 touchdowns. I don't see a way with T. Higgins, Jermaine Burton, Mike Gesicki, those other tight ends, that we're going to be able to get to this Cooper Kupp type of tier. And when I'm looking at guys to win me leagues, especially when I'm spending like the 4th overall pick, I want to be able to tell myself the story where I'm getting this legendary league winning outcome, 1,900 yards receiving, 16 touchdowns. I don't know how you tell that story with Jamar Chase. That's why I would tend to shy away from a guy like this. And when I bring up like fantasy pros, when we're looking at like these guys going all the way up here to the top, like that's why I would have Brees ahead of him overall, because I think Brees has a legendary type season within his range of outcomes. Jamar Chase, I don't think has that there. I don't think Justin Jefferson does either. That's why I would tend to kind of move these guys down. Again, if I have the 104, I'm not saying I wouldn't pull the trigger on Jamar Chase. I just wouldn't expect him to have that elite type of outcome. Moving on to T. Higgins. I have T. Higgins at wide receiver 32 overall. Fantasy pros, he's going at 25, which I think is going to be overvalued, and wide receiver are 48 overall. So this is another thing with the offense. I think he's probably overvalued by about 20 picks in total. You're buying a guy that has like mid-range wide receiver 2 range of outcomes right here. And in a down year for wide receivers, you're buying a guy, again, like Joe Burrow. If in order for me to get a sub-elite season for Joe Burrow, I'm expecting the rushing upside quarterbacks to not hit. In order for me to get a wide receiver 2 range of outcome for T. Higgins, because again, I'm going to guess it's going to be about 1,000 yards receiving and 6 or 7 touchdowns. In order for me to get that, you're probably looking at all those speculative wide receivers not hitting either, those wide receiver 2s with higher ranges of outcomes. And I'm looking like at a Drake London. I'm pulling this up real quick. A Drake London not hitting in the the range of like wide receiver 12, like for me to get like that mid range, like wide receiver 22 to wide receiver 17 that he did in 2021, 2022. So I would rather be spending wide receiver 32 prices on T. Higgins to get wide receiver 22 than be spending wide receiver 25 for me to get wide receiver 30. That's just how I would view the value of these players overall. Yeah, I can pull up the scoring settings and I could go, there's a possibility that we could get a very efficient T. Higgins season, and you could be looking at like 80 receptions, 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, 17 points a game, like a Nico Collins type of season. And now you're pushing your value of Joe Burrow up, because again, even if T. Higgins does something like that, you're looking at the overall passing touchdowns for Joe Burrow pushing 40. It's going to push Joe Burrow up the board. So again, if you're expecting more out of T. Higgins, you're probably expecting more out of Joe Burrow at that point. I already talked about 3rd round pick Jermaine Burton, where I think that he should be going in drafts. He's a little bit more interesting because of the if buts and thens of Jermaine Burton. Maybe he has a range of outcomes of wide receiver 3, 800 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns, something along those lines. Has more value if you're going to be speculating on a potential injury to like a T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, to move up to like wide receiver, like 1 theoretical outcomes at that point to take over as the alpha in the offense. Not something that I would be spending on. It's something to be paying attention to during the season from the waiver wire. Let's see. The 2 other guys to talk about are Andre Iosivas or Yosivas. He's the 6th round pick from Princeton. You see last year, last game of the season, 92% snaps, did have 2 touchdowns, 4 overall touchdowns. His role in the offense was a red zone receiver. So him being used as that big slot or goal line guy is going to cut into the potential overall upside of all the wide receivers for the Bengals. If he gets 4, or even like I could even see like him being more of a tight end in this offense. Those are just going to cap the ceiling of Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and even Burton. And then the last guy, and this is why I bring up like your Ben Skoronix, is Trenton Irwin is like this team's like special teams guy. From a coaching perspective, they like getting these guys out in the field. He did 95% snaps in week 11. They like getting these guys out in the field. If this guy gets a catch, he contributes. The team responds positively to it. He is going to cut overall in the upside of these players just slightly. That's what I would expect overall if he makes the roster going on. So you're looking at caps for all these guys because of some of the other role players that the Bengals are going to have. So moving on to the tight ends, Mike Gesicki signs with the Bengals for 1 year. Let me pull this up. 1 year, $3.25 million, which is nothing money. Mike Gesicki with the vacated opportunities from your Tyler Boyd back here. If we can get a 1-to-1 replacement Tyler Boyd for Mike Gesicki, you're looking at like low end to mid-range tight end one type of numbers, like 667 yards, 2 touchdowns within the range of outcomes for Gesicki if he wins that big slot type of tight end position. Also, that 2021 season, high-end range of outcomes for Gesicki is 800 yards receiving, 5 touchdowns. That's what I would be looking at if he can win that type of job, that type of role. He's going to be competing with Burton, T. Higgins, your Sivas's for him to win that job. Now, they re-signed Tanner Hudson. He had this run limited snap share, but this like receiving H-back, fullback that he was getting run on week 17, 7 targets, that type of thing. They also re-signed Drew Sample. He's their blocking tight end. So what this means for 4th round pick Eric All, who is interesting athletically, it's a hard road. We're expecting for him to really eat into this. They're going to have to cut Gesicki, probably looking at him moving into being that Y. And then maybe you're looking at like low end wide receiver 1 type of numbers for Eric All, if all things break in the right direction for him. And that's with them cutting some of the usage of Tanner Hudson and Drew Sample out. And these guys were rolling at like 30 to 50%. There was a point last year when it was about like 1/3 with all their tight ends on the team last year. And then that means that like Tyler McLaughlin, who is a little athletic, isn't going to make the roster at all. So there's a little bit of interesting stuff to break down at the back end of the tight end and wide receiver room for the Bengals. Quick overview. I would say, like, from a Fantasy Pros perspective, if these ADPs remain consistent by draft day, that Joe Burrow is probably slightly overvalued at 58 overall, even though wide receiver or quarterback 7 is relatively like fair for his value overall. Let's see. Zach Moss and Chase Brown are relatively good values going at the prices they are. Pieces of good offense is cheap. Probably wide receiver or running back 2 is the cap for Zach Moss. Running back 1, theoretically this year's Kieran Williams for Chase Brown. And then Jamar Chase is relatively appropriately valued at wide receiver 3 overall on Fantasy Pros. I have him at wide receiver 4. T. Higgins is a little overvalued at wide receiver, or at 48 overall, wide receiver 25. I think he should be closer to wide receiver 32. Jermaine Burton is wildly undervalued at 193, attached to this offense to be the number 3 with a little bit of upside. I have him at wide receiver 61 right now. If Gesicki gets cut, it would move him up the board. Right now, I have him as wide receiver 61. I would move him up probably like a 10 slots if Gesicki gets cut. He's 78 overall. Probably doesn't have a lot of redraft value outside of like very deeper leagues, but he is very interesting from a redraft perspective. From a dynasty perspective, I think he would be very valuable. I don't remember where I ranked him on dynasty right off the top of my head. And then Gesicki is undervalued at 260 overall if he ends up winning this job. Wide receiver, I have him at wide receiver or tight end 23. This is the tight end room for the Bengals. Remember, good pieces attached to good offenses in Joe Burrow. That's why I would like him at closer to tight end 23 overall than tight end 32. And then we are waiting for the rookies, Eric All and Tanner McLaughlin, to potentially be able to eat into the tight end room, because Tanner Hudson is probably more of a receiver and Drew Sample is more of a blocker. There is a vacated opportunity from a tight end perspective going on. So anyway, that's all I got for the day. I think tomorrow is going to be the Bills, and I'll see you guys later.